1961, my mom and dad bought some land right in the little hamlet of Benchlands so that they could retire. And we could ask, why did they come to Benchlands? And aside from the obvious beauty of the area, Dad had a strong historical connection to the area. Looking back at his great-grandparents who'd emigrated from Scotland, from their home in Glenfinnan in Inverness-shire, Scotland, they came west and homesteaded at the mouth of the Ghost on the east bank and called their ranch the Ghost River Ranch. They came with 6 children, and undoubtedly the fact that his brother-in-law had been in this area since 1881, that probably influenced them in coming to this area as well. As far as the children went, one of the daughters, my great-grandparents' names were Alexander and Mary Gillis, and one of the 6 children was also named Mary. Confusing. When she grew up, she ended up marrying my grandfather, William Simpson, in the late 1890s, and he took care of the hotel in Cochrane, ran the hotel in Cochrane, and he owned a hardware store in Cochrane, as well as being on council, and he was the chairperson of council for Cochrane. And all of that would have been in the very early 1900s. So they ended up having 9 children, and my dad, being the eldest boy, was actually farmed out to the ranch with his grandparents, Alexander and Mary, at the Ghost River Ranch, and he loved being out there. They still spoke a lot of Gaelic, and he actually learned Gaelic and spoke some Gaelic just from the influences of his aunts and uncles and grandparents. And yeah, he had some adventures. Apparently, there was one time when he was a very small child, he disappeared for some length of time that sent everybody into a panic. And turns out he wandered back into the yard when everybody's running around. And they said, "Where were you?" And he said, "Well, I was down where the ground moves fast." He'd gone to the river. So that was something that shook everybody up, I'm sure. Other things that he remembers as a very young boy and probably a wee child was going to the Barcy, and I now don't know if that would have been the Barcy as we know it or whether it would have been the lower Barcy, because there was one on Beaupré Creek Road, I'm given to understand. And apparently George Creighton was laying on the couch, and there was some sort of a bet that went on. My dad would earn a nickel if he could pull him off, and he said he pulled and George rolled, and he came off the sofa. He got his nickel, which at that time could even buy something probably. There's a family picture taken in Big Hill Country Book of the family all gathering at Glenfinnan Ranch, which would have been where Angus MacDonald, who was married to Alexander's sister, so Alexander's sister and brother-in-law's place was Glenfinnan, as the ranch was called. And it was called that because my great-grandfather and Angus MacDonald's wife were born and raised in Glenfinnan. And that picture in Big Hill Country shows my dad as a very young boy, and his brother who was next to him. Those would have been the only 2 kids at the time, I guess. His parents were both there, and his grandparents, the Gillies, and a lot of aunts and uncles. That would have included Enie and Annie and John and Duncan. And all of the McDonalds, including other children, would have been Helen, who was older than my dad, and Toddles, I believe, was there too, and some other relatives, Robinsons. It was a strong connection in the family, and interesting story about A.W. MacDonald. I mentioned that he came to Canada in 1881. He came with a Scottish laird, MacDonnell, who was kind of his boss, I guess. And they came and established a trading post in the area, and I don't know exactly where it was. It's said to be somewhere along the Ghost area. MacDonnell went back to Scotland, and MacDonald stayed here, and eventually he homesteaded that piece of land called Glenfinnan Ranch. And yeah, he had children, and one of his children was Donald Patrick MacDonald, known as by everybody as DP. And DP MacDonald ended up purchasing the Mount Royal Ranch at some point, which was a couple of miles down the road. And when we moved here, DP's daughter, Helen MacDonald, who'd never married, his eldest daughter was running the ranch.